First, back on the back of the room, we're gonna go then out back through the lobby, and then we'll regroup outside in the courtyard at the far side of it. For restrooms, for folks unfamiliar with the building, restrooms are just out the door and on your right, down the hall on your right. If you had not had a chance to review the pre-read materials, there are binders on each one of your tables that has the full packet that is sent out, so they're there for your reference. And then finally, for refreshments, for those that haven't found them, they're outside. We've got some snacks and some drinks. So if you want to go to the next slide. We've got a full agenda, so I'm gonna jump in and I'm gonna be tag teaming today with colleagues from the Executive Facility Institute. So we've got Toby Bergman and then Catherine Morris online that's gonna be helping us out. And if you look at the next slide. And just as a reminder, we did send out some reports to the advisory board members and your delegates 2 weeks back, talking about the progress that we made to date. It is having an impact. And I just we wanted to provide those just so that folks had some grounding, because I know it's been a while since we had one of our advisory board meetings. But you'll see through the work of the progress that we've had to date from those reports and some of what we'll talk about today. We've got a lot, we're learning a lot, and the one thing we're all doing is really having an impact. And so we're gonna dive right into the agenda. If you want to go to the agenda. So we're going to keep the conversations going. We're going to build up the progress that we made in those reports. We're going to do this a couple things. First, we're going to do a quick overview for each of the focus area work groups that are going to just provide a concise summary of the work that we've done today, as well as some of the key findings and takeaways. Then we're going to have a short break and we'll move to small group discussions on Everett, on decarbonizing the peak and financing the transition. And Toby's going to provide some additional background about how those small groups are going to work. Then we're going to wrap up with report outs and votes and recommendations on next steps. We are also going to hear from Secretary Tepper. She should be here in a couple minutes. She's dealing with an emerging issue. So if she can't get down here now, she'll come back at the end. So we might just have to juggle the agenda and the agenda just a little bit. So with that, I'm going to then turn it over to Toby, who's going to talk through a little bit more about how we're going to progress through it.
Great. Thanks so much, Melissa. Okay, so just briefly to remind folks of our ground rules here, you can see them up on the screen. These are the same as they've been in our previous advisory board meetings, so I'm not going to go into the details, except just to encourage folks to please provide your forthright input on the issues that we're going to be talking about. We really need it, we really value it. Please try to do so in a concise way to help keep us on time and on topic. We really do appreciate it. For those of you participating online, we welcome your participation as well. You can use the raise hand function in your Zoom, and we will take note and include you in the live meeting. Okay, next slide. So in terms of what to expect today, we're going to go through this in a little more detail when we get there. But as Melissa mentioned, we're going to hear some very brief updates from each of the FOGs, each of the advisory groups, work groups, on what they've been doing since the last advisory board meeting, their progress, some of the outcomes of that work. We're going to highlight some of the discussion questions that we want you to think about with respect to each of those FOGs. And then we're going to break into small groups. And we're going to do a little bit of a round robin exercise. So you're at tables. Each table is going to get some subject matter experts to come visit your table, walk you through some of the questions that the FOGs are thinking about, that you can provide input on, and also answer questions that you might have about the progress that's been made. It's going to be in a little bit of a round robin format. So each small table will get an SME from each of the FOGs or the 3 FOGs that we're going to be having discussions with respect to today. And we'll walk you through exactly how that's going to happen when we get there. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so just a reminder about the status of the various FOGs. So we have the Everett FOG, the decarbonizing the peak, and the financing the transition FOG. Each of these has been in the midst of their phase 2 work. So they did a whole bunch of information gathering and sharing at the beginning in phase 1. They've been now working to identify and assess different alternatives. And then the next phase, phase 3, which some of these FOGs are now on the verge of being ready to enter, is going to be about the evaluation and developing specific recommendations. So for at least the FPT FOG and the EMT FOG, they're kind of on the cusp. They're ready to get your input on what they've done for phase 2 and potentially move to phase 3. And they'll share a little more detail, specifically what they've done in phase 2 and the kind of info that they're interested in as we move into the presentations. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I'm gonna hand it over to Melissa, and I'm not sure where we are on this, if we're gonna.
Right there.
Oh, perfect. Oh my gosh, amazing.
So we are on our regular agenda. So right now I want to introduce Secretary Rebecca Tepper. I'm not sure she needs much of an introduction for folks in this room, but Secretary Tepper is the Secretary of the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, and she's going to provide us with an overview of the governor's energy affordability legislation, as well as a high-level overview of the environment in which we're working right now and where we go from here. So thank you. And you do need to stand there because otherwise people online can't see you. So you can adjust the microphone as you.
Yes.
Yes, you can adjust that.
All right. Everyone, good to see everyone. A nice full house again here today. Really appreciate again everybody's time that you're taking to be in these groups. It's not a minuscule amount of time that you're spending on this. So really appreciate it, and I do think it makes a difference to have all people in the room at the same time. So thank you for coming. So I thought I would give you a little bit of an update on where we are with some legislation and talk a little bit, as Melissa said, about the moment that we're in, all of us are in, and how we're trying to navigate that. So, as you know, when we started this Office of Energy Transformation and its work plans, I was hopeful, very hopeful, but also realistic, tackling a lot of complex problems at once, while engaging a lot of stakeholders and aiming for really measurable progress. Clearly is not an easy task. And a year later, the Office and the working groups have delivered on what the advisory board asked. The progress report circulated shows really extraordinary depth of dialogue through assessment and thoughtful analysis. And none of this would have happened without your commitment to the principles that we set out at the outset. And people have been open and honest and respectful and working to understand each other's perspectives. And I know everybody's been trying really hard actually to find common ground and work together. So, I do feel like that is an approach that makes Massachusetts different. And it's why I believe that we continue to make progress, even in the face of the extraordinary challenges that we're facing coming from the federal level right now. The Trump administration's threats to offshore wind and to the whole clean energy industry is very challenging for our energy future. As you know, they have slowed offshore wind and solar deployment, weakened our transmission build out, and rolled back energy efficiency and EV programs. They're simply just making it more expensive by constraining supply and shifting costs onto states like ours. These actions are really raising costs for consumers and creating reliability risks. So here in Massachusetts, we are clear-eyed about where we are and what is happening. The governor and the lieutenant governor and the team, and with the great help of the Attorney General's office, are working to protect our projects and to pursue every pathway to maintain momentum. And I do want to point out too that the unions and labor has been tremendously helpful on this front as well, really has stepped up in many states on helping us try to address some of these challenges. So thank you, Christy and your team. We're working with our partners to advance regional procurements and cross-border projects with Canada. So looking for other possibilities for new supply coming into the state. And we know that this is difficult work and it does require us all to be creative and collaborative and open to doing things differently. But even before the full scope of the federal government's actions unfolded, we were proactively planning with you all to identify what we needed to do to continue to drive down energy costs and make sure that we have a reliable and resilient system. The Energy Affordability, Innovation, and Independence Act is key to us doing that. And as everyone here knows about that act, it is quite comprehensive and long and complicated. But that's because you all know that there isn't one answer to these questions. There's not a single thing that we can do to lower the price of energy in Massachusetts. It's a lot of things that are put together. And so the bill is designed to bring more energy online, get unnecessary costs off of bills, and build more affordable energy future that keeps Massachusetts competitive. So we did ask for ideas when we were working on the bill, and dozens came in from many of the people in this room, so thank you all for that. And when the bill was being put together, the governor was very clear of what we needed to think about when we were figuring out what should go into this bill. And it was four main questions that we asked ourselves. Will it lower the bill? Will it stabilize prices? Will it avoid unnecessary spending? And will it bring more energy online? So as I've said, no silver bullet, no single action, but a holistic approach really is the only way that we're going to meet the affordability challenge, particularly with the federal policies working against us right now. So with respect to getting costs off of bills, we really focused on stabilizing prices and thinking about what might come off of a bill. As we saw last winter, charges based on usage can drive bills up when cold weather increases consumption. Families can see budgets upended overnight and unexpectedly. The legislation includes provisions to reduce volumetric charges, moving costs forward towards fixed structures that keep bills more predictable. We're also looking at programs and policies to see which ones can be reformed or phased out. This includes sunsetting the alternative portfolio standard, changing the net metering credits for large new facilities, and reforming Mass Save. Together, these changes and reforms are estimated to save ratepayers over $1 billion over the next decade. For example, the proposed changes to net metering credits for large new solar projects will continue to provide support while bringing the compensation in line with other states. For Mass Save, we propose changes to help reduce administrative costs while making the program better for consumers. As we all know, our energy efficiency program here in Massachusetts is a national leader, and it has cut demand by 15%, avoiding billions of dollars in infrastructure costs and delivering over $30 billion in net benefits. The legislation makes the program more efficient by reducing the number of program administrators, streamlining elements of the program, and leveraging economies of scale for contracting. These changes alone could help save $50 million in administrative costs per program cycle. We're also including options for paying for Mass Save differently. Today, as you know, all the program costs are recovered over a very short period of time, while the benefits of the investment last much longer. To address this, the bill puts forward an idea which authorizes, it does not require, the use of rate reduction bonds or securitization. This could help spread out some of the program costs over a longer period of time, smoothing impacts, keeping bills stable, and saving ratepayers billions over the next 10 years. The bill also creates incentives for third-party partnerships on infrastructure projects. These partnerships can bring private capital into play and return profits to both customers and communities. Together, these measures give us a new financing tools to more affordably support the substantial investment we will need over the next decade to meet growing demand and modernize the grid. So on unnecessary spending. Today, investments and costs are spread out across dozens of line items on the customer's bill. Utilities file multiple cases at the DPU to recover costs in a fragmented process. The result? There's no comprehensive planning, little or no comprehensive planning, and no full review of the impact on customers or what the alternatives might be. The The legislation gives the DPU authority to bring more order and transparency to the process, including consolidating proceedings for clearer oversight, smoothing seasonal spikes that drive volatility, capping month-to-month bill savings, and requiring comprehensive distribution system planning and load management to avoid costly upgrades. By integrating investment planning with demand management and leveraging virtual power plants, Massachusetts can save customers more than $1.7 billion over the next 10 years. On supply, the governor has been clear that we need to get more energy online in the region. We must diversify and localize and build resilience while we continue to collaborate and partner with the other New England states and our Canadian neighbors. To do this, the legislation gives the state a more flexible procurement authority. Right now, DOER hands are a bit tied. Every procurement is narrowly tailored, and the utilities charge hundreds of millions in fees for negotiating and carrying contracts on their books. The bill removes these barriers and changes this paradigm so that the state can procure what it needs when it needs it. We've seen the benefits of both regional and local clean energy. In Maine, onshore wind and utility solar have driven down wholesale prices, benefiting households and businesses. In Massachusetts, distributed solar was critical in meeting peak demand this summer, while battery storage has kept hospitals and critical facilities online during winter storms. With flexible procurement, we can scale these successes and expand transmission to move power where it is needed. The bill also removes the rigid 6-month procurement cycle for utilities to buy power to serve customers that remain on basic service. In 2022, this rule forced a 195% increase in National Grid's basic service rate because utilities were locked into buying at the peak of the global gas price. Flexibility would allow us to hedge and protect customers. Geothermal is another focus. The bill authorizes gas companies to own thermal loops to serve large users such as hospitals and universities. These projects would be paid for by those customers. This opens the door more broadly for an affordable energy resource that is literally beneath our feet. Finally, the bill removes the decade-old requirement that any new nuclear facility be approved by a statewide referendum. Many states have already repealed very similar provisions, and we need to stay competitive and take advantage of advanced nuclear as it takes off. The governor has been clear that we can't afford to ban potential new sources of energy, particularly resources for which Massachusetts has been a national leader with a strong and growing ecosystem to support it. Finally, interconnection. I know many of our favorite topics. We do need to get projects and customers connected faster and cheaper. Delays to being connected can be months or years right now. And this past June showed us the stakes as temperatures soared and demand hit near record levels. Behind the meter solar and storage kept the lights on. At the peak, these resources provided the equivalent of 4 large power plants. Without them, New England could face serious reliability challenges. Yet, too many similar programs and projects remain stuck to some level due to existing grid constraints. To address this bill requires utilities to create faster, cheaper, and more flexible interconnection processes, speeding timelines to get some of this energy online and at a lower cost. It also establishes energy-ready zones, codifying the work of the enabling sustainable economic development working group from this. This reform will be transformative. It will provide developers with clear, predictable pathways, and communities will have more certainty, and we can create more jobs. So that's outlining some of the key provisions of the legislation. Each is designed, as I said, to work with one another, to reduce costs and stabilize bills and secure a more reliable and affordable, sustainable energy future. These ideas were developed through work with many of you and also many of the issues that have come up in your working groups. They truly reflect the creativity of hundreds of stakeholders across Massachusetts, and we need to work together now and have these conversations and make sure that we can get this done. Understand that there's still a lot of conversations to be had. It's at the legislature. We are looking forward to working with them, but also hoping that all of you participate. Look at the bill. I get it that it's long and complicated, but find the stuff that matters to you in there and talk to your legislators about them, because we do need to get this bill passed. It's important to get it done, and we want to get it right. And we get it right by making sure that people look at it and give their opinions, and we hear from a lot of people. So much better to hear that you're wrong on something before something gets passed than afterwards. So really do appreciate that. And I am confident that, if we continue to work together and have the hard conversations and make tough choices, we are going to achieve a sustainable and affordable energy future here in Massachusetts. So I thank you all for your work, and I look forward to
Questions, have like 5 minutes of questions. Flash?
I was at an event with the governor the other day, and there was a press conference, and there was all these reporters there. And she said, any questions on topic? Okay, good. So maybe I'll do that. So thank you all very much. Oh, you have a question? Yeah.
Now, what's the status of the bill and how can we all be helpful?
The status of the bill is that it hasn't, we had a hearing, but it hasn't come out of conference yet. So it's still being looked at in a conference, and then neither house has passed it yet. So this is kind of the time to get in and talk to the legislators about support or issues that you have with the bill before it gets passed out. Yeah.
Do we anticipate maybe some committee action in the TUE committee in the October timeframe?
Okay. Well, thank you all.
Oh,
sorry. Hi, how are you?
Good
Good to see you.
Secretary, good to see you. I'm curious, this intersects to me with the governor's priorities around data centers in the state. I'm wondering how to reconcile those pieces, given that data centers are going to be a big increase in demand and could impact us for consumers and transmission and a lot of these different things that you touched on. So curious if you can talk about how the administration is thinking about reconciling those pieces.
As you know, this is a question that is coming up all across the country. And people have dealt with it in varying ways, and some better than others. I think we have an opportunity to learn from some of the issues that have happened in other states. It's important that we do this in a smart way, and the governor knows that. Thank you all.
Hey, thank you so much, Secretary. Let's see the slides over there.
and you can push this back now.
Okay. Okay, so we're gonna now move into presentations from subject matter experts from each of the FOGs. Who are gonna give us a little bit of an update on what's been happening. So we're gonna start with the EMT FOG. So Mike Walsh from Groundwork Data is coming up to present on this. You get the next slide. Working. Oh, great. Okay, I'm not okay. Yeah. So just in terms of where we are, you all received a deck in advance. Okay. We're gonna just give a bit of an overview, Mike will in a minute, of the initial phase 2 alternative assessment that the EMT FOD did. And then we're gonna ask you to hold questions, but write them down. Think about, what am I curious about learning more? What kind of input might I want to provide to the FOG as it thinks about moving on to phase 3? And you can see we'll be moving to small group discussions, and you can see the prompt up there that we will be offering you once we do that. But we're going to do presentations from all 4 FOGs first before we get that. So just take note of your questions, take note of your comments, and we'll get to them a little later in the meeting. Okay, so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mike. Just to know where we are, right? You can see the little orange arrow. We are right between 2 and 3. Okay. So Mike's going to tee us up and explain to us exactly how that's been going. Thanks so much, Mike.
Thank you, Toby. Just over a year ago, Unitil, National Grid, and Eversource entered into contracts for the Everett Marine Terminal liquefied natural gas facility. These contracts were understood to be expensive. There were questions about whether these contracts would align with our climate goals, and there were concerns that EMT was at risk of closing, leading to a regional gas reliability crisis. But because of these challenges, DPU instructed the utilities to evaluate alternatives that would allow the utilities to reduce or eliminate their reliance on EMT by the end of the contract cycle in 2030. The EMT FOG was convened to help guide this process. Last fall, the FOG learned about EMT's role, and in the winter and spring, the FOG developed guidance for the utilities to conduct their analysis and their assessments. In the summer, we moved into phase 2 as the utilities conducted their assessments and presented them to the FOG. Before I show the results, I'd like to take a moment to review the FOG's guidance here, the utilities, and explain the role of EMT in the region's energy system. We asked each utility to consider 3 categories of alternatives: invest in other LNG facilities and resources, pipeline system changes, and demand reduction such as electrification. We asked them to evaluate these categories based on several assessment criteria, including operations, cost, climate alignment, and whether the strategy could be implemented by 2030. Given the complexity and diversity of gas supply issues, we allow the utilities flexibility in their assessments. Each has varying degrees of reliance on EMT, as their systems can differ greatly with respect to customers, location, and potential alternatives. We asked each utility to consider 3. We can see how that complexity arises as we consider how gas is supplied to Massachusetts. This map shows the utility territories and the interstate pipeline system. The graph on the right shows how their customer demand stacks up along different supply options for the state. Most of this demand is served by domestic gas imports on the Algonquin and Tennessee pipelines. On our coldest days, these pipelines reach their maximum capacity to deliver gas, and that's when the Everett Marine Terminal comes in and plays a role, both at its location immediately north of Boston, but also as a source for trucked liquid gas delivered to the tendrils of the system, moving energy in a way that the pipelines cannot. To explore these issues in detail and the alternatives, I'm going to zoom in on Fitchburg territory operated by Unitil up here. Here, Unitil's system receives gas from a branch of the Tennessee pipeline. On a normal winter day, Tennessee fills up this system, and gas moves from Fitchburg and out to the north and west towards Gardner here. As the weather becomes colder, heating demand increases, and the system's ability to supply gas down this single pipe decreases. This is when LNG is injected into the western part of the system, feeding the equivalent of 3,000 customers on that peak day. The gas utilities prepare for this winter weather through supply planning, which begins by estimating demand over an hour, a day, a cold snap, and season based upon historical patterns and future changes. This example plan shows the first 3 days in a 1 in 30 cold snap event. On these days, 75% of the expected demand can be met by using supplies from the Tennessee pipeline, delivered from the south. However, the presence of EMT to the east, another LNG facility in New Brunswick, can help fill up this lateral.
Sorry, let me try to turn this down. I don't.
You mute online? Thank you. The remaining gap on the first day is equivalent to the size of customer demand on the western part of the system. This is where trucked LNG from EMT plays a role. On the coldest day, 3 trucks worth of LNG need to keep the gas flowing in Gardner. Unitil looked at the options for reducing and eliminating this demand. Their analysis showed that they would need the equivalent of 3,000 residential conversions of customers off gas. These conversions would need to happen more towards the west of the system, but probably involve customers in Fitchburg as well. In this territory, adoption of electrification and electric strategies has been low so far, and nowhere near the pace needed to reduce or eliminate reliance by 2030. Unitil is adding storage capacity to this site with temporary trailers that could allow it to potentially source LNG from other areas. However, as we see here, over 10 days, the constant supply of trucks is needed to keep refilling such storage. Some of that could come from other LNG providers within Massachusetts, but that might not be a scalable strategy for all of the LDCs, the gas utilities, as they have similar and larger needs. A 50-mile trip to deliver LNG from Everett could become a 300-mile trip from Pennsylvania or Canada. during stormy weather that involves risk. Eversource's challenges are on a different scale. Right now, EMT's presence ensures that Eversource customers can take sufficient gas down this G lateral here, serving the southeast. However, just last week, Enbridge announced an investment in the G lateral that will allow Eversource to take more gas up from the south. This would eliminate the zone's reliance on EMT with a lower cost and less carbon-intensive source of gas. Eversource territory in Cambridge and Somerville is a different story. Any pipeline solution would face a longer timeline due to greater construction challenges in the area. Demand reduction would need to include some of Cambridge's large consumers. New LNG storage to replace EMT just a few miles away is not practical in dense Cambridge right now. And we would probably need to still tie a new tie between the Tennessee and the Algonquin to maintain a system redundancy that EMT provides right now. National Grid is facing similar challenges. In the first half of its assessment, National Grid explored the options for LNG storage across their injection assets. Again, reducing demand requires a faster pace of electrification in these areas than seen today. There's potential to increase injection capacity at these sites and to increase trucked in LNG from elsewhere, but these would only be partial solutions and come with cost and reliability trade-offs only to shift the source of liquefied natural gas. Boston presents a similar challenge to what Eversource faces with Cambridge. EMT injects directly into the Boston system, and within the reach of EMT's direct impacts, approximately 1/3 of peak demand would need to be reduced. Alternatively, National Grid explored what it would take to build a new 4-mile high-pressure pipeline crossing downtown Boston. In addition to the eye-watering cost, there was a consensus that siting and permitting timeline would make such a project impossible, at least by 2030. Any bets if it's going to happen by 2040? Before I get into the takeaways and next steps for the fog, I want to thank National Grid, Eversource, and Unisol for their efforts in assessing the alternatives here and engaging with a diverse group of stakeholders on a very challenging topic. This experiment and engagement, which we're conducting here with OET, ETAB, and the fog, represents a novel approach to the challenging questions that are often protracted in regulatory proceedings. There's still a long ways to go on our work, but participants in this process have felt like it's allowed them to learn and engage more meaningfully with this complex challenge. To wrap things up, we examined 3 classes of options. In some areas, new LNG infrastructure can be built to carry the load, but it'll take some time. We would also need another source of LNG. Some pipeline changes might be suitable for some areas if implemented soon. Squashing gas demand aligns with climate goals, but requires a robust integrated energy planning effort for scaling up coordinated customer electrification in the right areas. There are many opportunities to reduce reliance, but eliminating it requires a complex mix, overcoming substantial inertia. Doing that by 2030 is a tall order and involves near-term actions that may not clearly benefit long-term interests. Eversource's proposal for new supply in Algonquin for the Southeast right now is the lowest hanging fruit to significantly reduce reliance on EMT. It'll reduce costs for residential customers on that G lateral for about $90 a year. However, the fixed costs of EMT become concentrated on a smaller number of customers, creating greater uncertainty about the long-term role that this resource plays for the region. This is the hallmark of the gas transition. With a growing set of new technologies and competition, costs become concentrated on a declining customer base. The fog will wrestle with this finding in phase 3, diving into the assessments in more detail and formulating recommendations to guide policy and action throughout the remainder of the current contract and to guide the future utilization of EMT. Right now, we see our focus on finding ways to reduce the cost for gas ratepayers and demand reduction in the areas of highest opportunity. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts about how we should go about that in small group sessions. I'm going to turn it back to Toby right now, who's going to explain a little bit more about that in this speaker.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Mike. Very informative, rapid fire update on all the great work that the fog has been doing. So you can see up on your screen here, this is the prompt, right, that we want you to be thinking about in small groups. So right now, we encourage you to jot down any questions that you might have. Okay, think about any immediate reactions to the prompt here. So what are your key takeaways on these initial assessments and high-level findings? Given these initial findings, do you have suggestions on where you think the focus for phase 3 should be. For example, ways in which to reduce costs for gas ratepayers, accelerate demand reduction, et cetera. What do you think the cloud could be most useful, or how do you think the cloud could be most useful in its information gathering and its thinking and its evaluation as they move into phase 3? Okay. Next slide. So we're gonna now move on to decarbonizing the peak fog. So we have Liz Metatol from E3, who's going to come up here and present an update from the DG peak fog. Again, just in terms of where we are here, we're going to hear this update from Liz in a second. Then we're going to move to small group discussions, and then at the end, we'll have a chance to report out and hear from the small groups and do some decision making. And you can see the small group prompt on the screen right there, but we'll review that in a couple of minutes again as well. So Liz, please come on up. As Liz comes up, I'll just share where are we with this fog. So next slide. The DTP fog is in the thick of phase 2. So this is a highly complex challenge. Right, it's a broad set of questions and issues. So they are sorting through them. They have a methodology. They're in the middle of it. So part of what we're hearing from Liz is exactly what their plan is. But there's more work in phase 2 that's ongoing. This group is not at the stage of moving to phase 3. So with that, I'll pass it over to Liz.
Great, thanks. I'll move over here before I start talking. Of course. Good? Okay, great. So I'm here to give a brief update on the work of the Decarbonizing the Peak work group. This is a reminder here. We walked in detail through this slide during our previous fog meeting, but what we want to emphasize here is that we are doing an assessment approach or a framework approach to evaluating options to reduce reliance or replace the operations of peaker plants in Massachusetts. We're not picking a solution in this phase. We're figuring out what is a viable alternative. So the way that we've started that process is to come up with a really comprehensive list. You know, what are all possible options, supply side, demand side, to reduce peaker generation in Massachusetts. So this could be technologies, drop-in fuels, storage, etc. We have come up with this list, as I'll show you, and done a technical feasibility screen. So first at a generic level, and then we'll talk about at participating facilities, as well as extending that, looking at the technical feasibility. So how can these alternatives replace the operations or performance or contributions of peaker plants to the grid? What is the commercial availability of alternatives and the maturity and the supply chain? So kind of what is technically viable to replace peaker plant operations? We are also assessing the environmental and societal impact of different alternatives to a generic peaker plant operation. So, you know, what does that mean? You know, air quality, water quality, jobs impacts on the societal side, you know, what are the impacts of these alternatives relative to the peaker plant today? And then we will get to evaluating the implementation considerations once we have that shortlisted set of technologies. So siting, permitting, you know, how would we actually design sort of policies and economics to make this a reality? One thing I will, actually I'll do it on the next slide. I'll jump to the next slide here. I wanted to note that we're looking at two parallel kind of coordinated frameworks here, both on the technologies and the policy side. So on the technology side, you know, the framework evaluates 41 different technology options across 34 different criteria. On the policy side, we have 42 different policies, looking at 36 different criteria. And that's a lot if you think of the matrix in terms of what we are evaluating for the options to replace or reduce reliance on peakers. So I did want to flag that we're kind of, you know, at this phase in an assessment phase, doing tiered rankings or sort of categorical scoring of the different criteria for each of the different policies, and then moving towards more rigorous assessments of the specific short list of options that pass through this screening phase. Great, so I'm gonna assume here that you've done your pre-read materials on this slide and the next slide. What I want to emphasize is we received in the last ETAB meeting a lot of very helpful, constructive feedback, and hopefully today we get more of the same. And we've really used that to refine and update the framework. That's how we ended up with so many different criteria and so many different technology options. Is thanks to all of your very helpful pieces of feedback. So those are summarized here on the right. Again, it increased the amount of technologies we evaluated, it changed some of the categories, added some categories, and also changed the way we think about evaluating some of the different technologies and criteria. And I'll just note here is the updated full list of categories on the technology side. These are groups of criteria that we are evaluating for each technology. And slide. And here I just want to note that the same thing is true on the policy side. A very helpful, constructive list of feedback from this group, summarized here on the right-hand side, and it has impacted the way we are evaluating policies. And the policies help us to think through, what would we need to actually make the transition, realistic from an economic perspective, from a facility owner perspective to transition that site. So here I wanted to talk about how we've moved, I think when we spoke in the spring, we were really focused on the design of the framework, and our work over the course of the summer has been focused on applying the framework. So what we did is, based on the feedback from ETAB in the spring, we developed our refined framework. So that was with input from this group. We then sent it out to subgroups on costs, emissions, community, to think through, in more detail with a group of experts. Are we getting the criteria right? Are we thinking about how to evaluate that criteria correctly? Got some very helpful feedback from those subgroups, and we brought that subgroup, so the subgroup review brought that back into our updated framework, which is the framework we're working with now. We have 2 current activities, and I'm gonna double click on them in a second. One is case studies for participating facilities who have opted in to help us think through what peaker plant reduction or replacement would look like at their site. And then the archetypes is an extension of this bottom-up approach. So, okay, I wanted to give you a very quick example of what this looks like in practice. So this is the Canal generating station in Sandwich, Massachusetts. In total, it's about a 1.5 gigawatt facility. The step 1 of the participating facility subgroup was to define a scope. So they're focused on, it's just over a gigawatt, the 2 units, 1 and 2, that are the older units on the site. And so what this group has done is take that generic framework that was applied to a generic peaker plant and said, what would it look like at our site? The group came together, looked at the different technology options, made some suggested edits. And they're in the process, they've done some initial identification of what are the priority criteria at our site, what are the things that are going to be particularly important to think about in replacing the peaker plant operations. They are also working on refining the list of potential technologies and figuring out, what we think would be the short list at that site, and they'll be bringing that back to our working group for discussion with the working group. Now, just a couple more real quick. So at the same time, we are extending, so it's great to figure it out for 4 different participating facilities. As part of this bottom-up approach, though, is we want to understand how that extends to all peaker facilities in Massachusetts. And so what we've done is we have an inventory of peaker plants in Massachusetts, and we're extending the framework to look at what categories or subgroups or archetypes of peaker plants would look like if we customize the framework to those types of facilities. So these are just some examples at the bottom. Low capacity factor facilities, smaller facilities, they might be easier to replace their operations. We'll look at that. low energy generating, so peaker plants that are not utilized very much, may be better candidates for peaker plant replacement, as well as those with, large land areas that may have easier time with redevelopment. So we are extending the framework. The last slide. Oh. Okay, so there are 4 things that we're working on now as we wrap it up. So one is we are finalizing the framework application for the participating facility subgroups. I think one of the really helpful parts of having these participating facilities on board is it's surfacing what are the challenging questions. You know, how are we going to think about alternative fuels and their viability and on what time scale? We are in the process of also extending the analysis to the archetypes, as we mentioned. In parallel, we are tracking, monitoring, refining our policy framework and thinking about, you know, how private facility owners, what are the kind of policy and market conditions that would need to be in place for peaker reducing reliance or replacement to be viable. In phase 3, and certainly in part because of the feedback from this group, we're then thinking about sort of what happens at a system level as you start to reduce reliance on peaker plants. So that is kind of the whirlwind view of what we're doing in the Decarbonizing the Peak working group, and really appreciate all of your contributions so far.
Thank you, Liz.
Great.
Okay, so once again, you can head back to the previous slide. You can see our prompt here that we're going to be asking you to think about once we go into small groups. Are there clarifying questions that you have on the progress that the DTP FOG has made or the anticipated next steps? How should the FOG think about balancing short versus longer term options to curb fossil fuel use at these facilities? Okay. And Melissa, I think are you gonna introduce me or how?
I'll introduce you. All right.
So next, we're gonna just do a report out from Toby. He's gonna do the report out. He's been a great colleague. We've been kind of tag teaming on helping to facilitate the finance and transition. So Toby's gonna give a sense of where we are on that one, and then the same thing. We'll give you a prompt at the end and then talk through it. So if you want to do the next slide, Megan. So again, you had a lot of information in your pre-read. We're not going to go through that. We're just going to today give you sort of a sense of high level where we've been, some of the takeaways, and what's coming next. And just as a reminder, the Evergreen Terminal Focus Area Work Group, we've actually done a lot of work in this work group. I want to thank everybody for all the time, the effort, really the dialogue, the collaboration. It's been really good. So we are really getting towards the end of phase 2 work and going to phase, actually we're in phase 3, so we're gonna have some questions during that. We've also, and Toby will touch on this a little bit, we've also had some work group members surface some other ideas that we highlighted in the pre-read. Toby will talk a little about that, so that's going to be one of the questions that we're gonna ask the advisory board about how to address those 2 new options that have not been discussed at the advisory board yet. So turning over to Toby.
Thanks so much, Melissa. So just to remind folks what the FPT FOG's mandate is all about, the idea is we have this significant investment in distribution architecture that's going to be needed in the coming years to enable the transition. And there was a potential that this could result in a kind of hockey stick effect, where the cost of financing this transition lead to significant increases in costs for ratepayers. And then eventually, once you've kind of gotten over that hurdle, it will level out again. But the question of the FPT FOG is really wrestling with is, can we smooth this transition in some way? We cannot remove the cost of doing it, but through tools of financing, can we make it less lumpy? Can we smooth those rate increases? Can we assign the costs to those who benefit from the investments in a more direct or tailored way? Can we actually de-risk some of these investments overall to lower the cost of capital? So we started off with identifying a whole bunch of opportunities to go beyond the status quo, right? What are some different financing tools we could potentially use? And then we've been assessing them. You can go to the next slide. So in terms of what we specifically have done since our last meeting, we started off, so you may recall at the last ETAB meeting, we presented you all with an evaluation, or excuse me, an assessment framework and a list of 7 alternatives. You all offered some very helpful suggestions on that framework. We revised it, brought it back to the FOG, and then we had analysis group, our very helpful consultants, come up with a proposal for taking that assessment framework and evaluating each of our different alternatives from some kind of a red to a yellow to a green. Red meaning potentially challenging or potentially detrimental in some way with respect to a particular criterion, yellow being somewhere in the middle, and green being some benefit with respect to that particular criterion. So analysis group went off and thought about how would we actually, use these different criteria and what would a less good, medium, and good look like. And they came back to the FOG with a proposal around color coding for each of these different criteria. We got some feedback from the FOG on that, and they were comfortable with it. And then analysis group actually shared a straw proposal for running all of our different alternatives through the assessment criteria, color coding all of them. Okay, and so they explained that to the FOG, answered questions, and then the idea was the FOG needs to make this its own. We want to actually have the FOG own these assessments, so we broke into small groups, had different small groups within the FOG look at the different alternatives and amend, adjust, add additional ideas, suggestions, potential considerations to the proposal that analysis had come up with, and we checked in and folks are comfortable with that. Okay, so that's sort of where we are now, right? The FOG has gone ahead and approved those revised assessments, right? And then as Melissa mentioned a second ago, and we'll share in a minute, also come up with some new proposed alternatives that we are in the process of thinking about running through that same exact assessment framework. So really our purpose here, where we are right now, is we would like the advisory board to take a look at what the assessment has done, what it looks like, and give us feedback and offer us some suggestions for phase 3, and hopefully agree that this is a sound enough basis for us to move into the evaluation phase. Next slide. So just in terms of what the framework looked like, the final framework had 23 different criteria within 3 different categories. So there is a category of, are there benefits with respect to investment or cost recovery? Are there challenges or how easy is it or hard is it with respect to implementation, and some other intangibles. When we were comparing the alternatives with respect to these different criteria, we were comparing it to traditional utility cost recovery and regulation, the status quo. That's how we determined the color coding. We were not evaluating them against each other. Okay. And then when we were thinking about impacts, we were looking at it with respect to the impact on ratepayers of investor-owned utilities. So those are some important caveats there. And in general, overall, the FOG affirmed moving forward with the next stage of evaluating and deciding on the 7 alternatives that we were looking at over this phase. Okay, so and interestingly, 87% of the initial proposed color coding were agreed to, right? So the analysis group proposed something, the FOG agreed with 87%, so it's pretty good hit rate, I would say. All right, next slide. Okay, so your eyes are now like, whoa. Okay, so we sent to you the full evaluation for all of the different alternatives that we looked at. There's explanations, right? There's details in there. So that was part of the pre-reading. We encourage you to dig into that. There's a lot of helpful information. This is basically like a summary table that shows everything, all the different color coding that we came up with for all of the different alternatives. And we're not going to go into these. We're not expected to absorb all of this right now, but just a couple things of note. If you look at, there are a couple different kinds of alternatives, right? But you can see some of them have the kind of spectrum of green to red when we look at the near versus long-term rate or bill impacts. So that reflects the idea that some of these are actually shifting costs that would, in the near term, create that lumpiness more over to the long term. These are things like securitization, for example. Some of the alternatives are doing something to directly assign benefits to directly assign costs to those who might be benefiting from the investment. So these are things like a clean energy distribution tariff, where a company, a group of companies that is benefiting from infrastructure investments are actually more directly paying for them, and it's therefore not going on the rate base. And then some of these alternatives are doing something different, where they're actually raising some kind of money that would otherwise not have to be paid for by ratepayers or potentially by taxpayers, right? So for example, the idea of climate super fund. So there are a couple of different general types of categories and general types of benefits that you can see in this overall evaluation. Next slide. So some broad observations that the FOG has made as they've gone through this exercise. Number one, importantly, we've done our best to come up with a sort of single color code for each of the criteria with respect to each of the alternatives, but in reality, a lot of the impacts are going to really depend on the details of implementation and design. In addition, there is no way to eliminate these costs, right? Someone has to pay. We can smooth them, we can target them, but they're not going to go away. In addition, we can use a number of these alternatives together. We've already been thinking about different ways to pair them that could actually increase benefits, address some of the challenges, right? So the package is going to be important. And then finally, we also need to think about when it comes to packaging, what are the overall impacts? You could have a particular financing tool, like securitization, for example, that might have a minimal impact on utilities financing overall, other kind of major impacts on the system. But once you start combining these and it gets to a certain scale, it might look different. So we're going to have you thinking about these cumulative impacts once you come up with a package of recommendations. Next slide. Okay, finally, we just want to name that there are a couple of additional alternatives that our members have come up with that we are currently wrestling with. They have already actually come forward with a straw proposal for how we would evaluate these against our criteria. But the two different ones are a greenhouse gas fee and state revolving fund combined. So the idea would be there's a GHG fee that's applied to all fossil fuels delivered to or produced in Massachusetts, right? And the revenue from that would be applied in some way as electric bill credits or clean energy related infrastructure upgrades using a state revolving fund. Okay, so this could have the potential to finance a lot of ideas, right? A lot of other investments, but it would be funded through a GHG fee. And then on the right-hand column there, you can see another idea, which is DER aggregation financed by rate reduction bonds. So the idea here is, could we use rate reduction bond proceeds as proposed in the administration's agenda here to provide loans through Mass Save or otherwise, right? The specifics are being sorted out, but for DER, for solar and storage. And the idea would be that this would actually, if we were targeting this in specific areas or infrastructure upgrades would otherwise be necessary, if you could reach the sufficient scale, you could avoid the cost of those infrastructure upgrades. And so you would basically having DER mitigate investment needs and therefore decrease overall costs to the system. Okay, these are two ideas. We're thinking about them. We want your feedback on them. Next slide. Okay, so these are the prompts that we're going to be asking in small groups. What issues, criteria, outcomes are most important for the FOG to consider as it moves into phase 3? And then we want your feedback on these two additional potential alternatives. Okay. We're now going to move into our final FOG presentation. So we can go to the next slide. So I'm going to introduce Melissa back up to the mic. And in that slide, we're going to talk about an update from the asset FOG, Sustainable Economic Development FOG, and same overall approach here. You've got your pre-read, right? We're going to share some information on the progress to you now. This FOG is still within phase 1, and we are not going to have a small group discussion on this just because they're really still in the information gathering phase. I'll hand it over to Melissa.
Great, thanks. And the other thing that we're gonna do is a prompt for finance and the transition. I think when folks saw that really nice combined color coded slide, the state of Massachusetts, where we are looking for a new flag. So there's one there, we can identify that too. All right, so we want to go to the next one. So unlike the other 3 FOGs, we are a bit behind in this one, and that's because we launched this one later. You all approved this at, I think, the January meeting, so it took us a little bit to get up and running. But we are now moving at a clip through phase one, so we are still in the middle of phase one stuff, and we're going to be updated. We're not really gonna have much of a discussion at the table, so this the next time we will. Okay, next one. So just as a reminder, why did we create this working group? A couple of things. One, we know we have a lot of economic development goals, a lot of growth goals, and we want to grow in several areas that are energy intensive. We also know that the process of connecting new customers to the system can take some time. And it's because of the way, right, that we have things structured here today. We don't really build on spec. We build when we know that customers are going to be there, which can then create challenges when we want to connect people quickly, new customers quickly to the grid. So what we talked about as the advisory board, and you all approved, was to jumpstart this conversation by creating this new working group. And again, we have the mission here to advance clean energy ready economic development zones that enable key business sectors to grow Massachusetts in alignment with our state's interconnection, land use planning, environmental justice and equity, housing and economic development initiatives. So that was the charge that you gave to the working group, and we've been off and running. Going to the next slide. And so we just talked a little bit about this, but again, this is what the working group, as we've started to have the conversations, what's really crystallized the working group is this is what we're trying to do. This is the gap we're trying to close. Right, utilities need that kind of customer commitment and payment before making those really significant grid investments. And that's important. That's the structure we have today. And that's what we do. But sometimes we have businesses that either are unsure when they might be coming, how much energy they might be needing, when they might need it. And so it's also that upfront cost also that could be really challenging for them before they have their businesses up and running. So we have this gap of, you can't exactly tell me how much it's going to cost or when you might have the energy ready. I can't tell you exactly when I might be coming or how much energy I'm going to need when. And so here we are. And so that's the gap that we're trying to fill. If we want to keep moving forward with our economic development goals, our growth goals, how do we try to kind of close that gap? So what have we done so far, Bob? We have, again, a lot of information in your pre-read about meetings and the conversation we had, so I'm just going to highlight a few things. First, we decided that we have to understand, all right, level set, what are we already doing in the Commonwealth? What are the programs? What are the processes, right? What are the policies that we have today? How's the regulatory structure work today? So we've had a lot of conversations around that to understand the current load connection process, how building codes and standards plan out, what is the electric sector modernization plans, that is it a forward planning, how do they work, where are they in the structure today, how are they being considered going forward. We talked about what's known as the capital investment project plans. Those are on the distributed energy resource side. So it is actually trying to kind of build out a system on spec a little bit for distributed energy resources. Are there some analogies we can learn from that? And we're learning a bit about what we're doing with our transportation electrification planning. How are we planning for that? So making sure we understand all the planning that's happening, all the different proceedings, all the different things that are kind of putting pressure on the grid and how they're either working together or not, or what we can learn from them as we think about how do we create these zones. Then we want to understand what are the economic development offerings that we have today. And what can we learn from things that have gone well? Where are examples around the state where we've seen this, closing this gap? What are some of the takeaways we have from that? So we looked at some of the processes, the programs, policies that are out there. And we spent some time really understanding some areas of state that have really done this well, including the Devon's community. I think folks are pretty familiar with that. What made that work? And so we talked to some of the businesses there. And then finally, looking at what other states are doing. It's always good to understand what your competitors are doing, how are other states addressing this, what are they doing around things like economic development rates, having certified kind of, energy ready sites. What are they doing around tariffs for these kinds of customers? So really trying to dig into that. And then we also had we're starting to have some conversations around data centers. So in addition to kind of learning from what exists, we also wanted to talk to the folks that actually might want to take advantage of this. So let's talk to the businesses. What are they, what are their pain points? What do they need? You know, we don't want to build something and not have them come, so how do we work together? So really want to thank a lot of our business partners from around the advisory board, kind of partnership, this roundtable, NAOM, AIM, working with them, they helped us identify potential end users to talk with, and so we looked at them in clusters, we brought them together in focus groups, so we had some one-off conversations, but these are the sectors that we identified as a working group based on the economic development plan of the state that we wanted to talk with, because this is where we're trying to really either grow or expand our economy. So we talked climate tech, manufacturing, healthcare, life sciences, housing, real estate, and AI data centers. We've gotten most of these conversations done. We have a few more to do, but again, really trying to talk to folks to understand what they need, what they're looking for. Next slide. And so just some takeaways, I don't think any of these should be too surprising to lots of folks, so we, you know, some of them, there are some unique aspects, but overall, when we really think about it, the things that are coming up, the bubbling to the top, the commonalities, we heard from these businesses, first, energy costs, the capacity constraints for new site development and expansion, so again, the conundrum that we have, we don't have the energy right on tap, ready to go. Sometimes the inability to obtain that timely interconnection, inability to get some of the understanding what the infrastructure flexibility need to them so they can make decisions. So again, this is some of the things we need to address. Challenges with multiple handoffs, not just necessarily within utilities, but across the board. So the permitting, the siting, the infrastructure coordination, so not just in the electric or gas utilities, but also water, sewer, et cetera. So you know, that kind of one-stop shop concierge was something that a lot of businesses said was very helpful to them. And then just other things that were important as they're thinking about the site selection. Again, the permitting timeline, so if things are ready to go, that's great. Talent, is there the right talent for the business they have? Clusters, some of these sectors really do like to be clustered around each other. They like to kind of feed off each other, so that's important for them. Access to transportation and other infrastructure. So these were some of the feedback that we got from folks. So you can see there's some overlap with the energy piece. There's a lot of overlap with energy piece, but there's also other elements that as you move forward this work group, we're gonna have to consider. In the next slide. So in terms of then kind of near term next steps and then longer term next steps, so we're always a work group. So the next steps for the work group, we are going to take all this information that we got, work with the work group to synthesize the information, identify really what we think are those key gaps, and develop some of the strategies for how we might move forward. And we're going to look at them in kind of buckets. So one, potential sites. So should we be identifying, looking at potential, you know, demonstration sites around the state to start with and think through how we can move forward with them. Looking at economic development rate offerings, again, should we be considering them? If so, how? What would it look like? And then the regulatory models to support the proactive build out of clean energy and related infrastructure. So again, these are the things that we're going to be moving forward with. The work group will be starting to split up into committees and smaller subgroups and think through this. And then longer term, after we work through that, we'll be making recommendations to the advisory board about how to move forward and if there are regulatory policy changes that we need, what those are, and talking through how we might move forward with them. And we are at break. So yeah, there you go.
Everyone got all that?
Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna take a 10-minute break. We'll be back at 2:30. Okay, then we'll have some other stuff. So see you in 10 minutes.
Yeah. Now I'm in Paris, right? Yes. Yeah, a lot of money.
Hey.
I don't know what they are. I don't
We should try to find. There's a question and answer. So let's walk you through on exactly what's going to be happening for the next hour or so. So maybe you want to move the slide ahead. Okay, so we split you up into groups, and you split yourself up into small tables. We'll also be splitting up the folks who are joining online into small groups as well. And we're going to do a round robin discussion. So some subject matter experts and facilitators who've been working with each of the FOBs are going to come visit your tables. They're going to rotate among their tables. So each table will have 20 minutes with a expert or facilitator associated with each of the 3 FOBs. Okay? So you're going to stay exactly where you are. You don't need to move. The facilitators, the SMEs are going to come around and visit you. So you'll have an opportunity to discuss, ask questions, provide feedback with that facilitator present on that particular FOB's work. The facilitators, as I mentioned, are going to be rotating, and when they come to after round 1, when they come to your group, they're going to start off just by updating you on some of the feedback that they heard already from the first round. And the idea being that hopefully you can take that feedback, maybe build on it, right? So it's sort of a longer conversation than just 20 minutes in a sense, right? Because you're going to take what's been said and maybe add to it, maybe question it, whatever it might be. At the end, we're going to come back as a large group, and facilitators are going to consolidate feedback that we heard and share it back to the large group. And you might actually have a pretty good sense at your table, at least in rounds 2 and 3, of the kind of feedback coming up, because you'll have heard it from your facilitators. Then after that, we have some votes that we're going to take and ETAB and sharing our next steps to go around. So that's how this is going to work. It's going to be somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes per round. And let's just go to the next slide. Megan, these are all the prompts, all the questions up on the slide. So you can see them. The facilitators also have them with you, with them, so they can prompt you with those questions. Okay, so I'm going to check around everyone to feel like you're oriented, you have a basic understanding of what's happening. Okay, great. All right, so facilitators, please go to your assigned groups. If you find yourself at a table without a facilitator, talk to me, talk to Megan, Catherine, we'll make sure that you're you're getting taken care of. All right, thanks so much, so we'll let you know. Yeah, I'll know, we'll come back and know when it's time to switch. Okay, all right, so 20 minutes, see you again.
Okay, so here we're starting with.
Right.
So there can be further calls.
Yeah.
I worked in the carbon, oh, never mind.
See you guys.
I we're bumped.
But I love it. Yeah, it's great. So she makes anxiety.
People were on and oh my god, I'm so embarrassed. And everyone loves it.
My favorite thing is when a cat walks by a camera. It's really cool.
Okay. So here's how this is gonna work.
Okay.
We are gonna hear from facilitators. What they heard is a quick summary. What we out of these conversations, and it's gonna be relatively rapid, and there's a lot of input that we received. But we wanna be clear, we captured everything in the notes. Okay, so we don't have every detail, don't worry. So I just want to, I see side talks going on, bringing attention here, so we don't lose the information that we receive. So Melissa, you may kick us off and share some feedback on the EMT group. Go ahead.
All right, so I'm gonna try to be back to be able 4, 5, and 6 for the EMT, and mine's will be equals 1, 2, and 3. So I will start out with a statement, so not kind of feedback on the key takeaways or next steps, but just sort of high level. So at the tables, there was a lot of feedback on disappointment around some of the transparency. In the recent filing of Eversource and review for a 10-year supply contract. So there was a lot of concern that didn't come up in the work group. There was a lot of challenging conversation around then how we move forward in the work group on some issues coming up. And so I think that, just want to flag that, that came up. And so I think, we're going to have to do some deeper dives in some of those areas, particularly around the demand reduction in those regions. So wanted to just flag that. So a couple of things and commonalities though from across the table in addition to that. One, there was a lot of conversation around the fact that we should be looking at how we reduce costs to repairs going forward. So what are the potential options around that? Should we be looking more broadly at other customers that benefit from ENT? Should we be looking at, how, again, trying to get a better understanding of what customers are paying for today? And are there ways to mitigate those costs? So that was definitely, I guess, we should do a little classification. Kind of the second thing that came out was should we be evaluating the alternatives that we're looking at? So there's a lot of discussion around increasing truck LNG. I think there were a lot of advisory groups that that's probably not the direction we want to go. So is that something that we should maybe just put aside over there and not spend a lot more time on it, but really be spending much more time on the demand reduction side and accelerating electrification? Which then brought us into again commonality of should we be taking a step back and looking today at how we're targeting our mass save dollars and our target electrification and our integrated energy planning and overlap that with the areas that we have been identified by the LDCs as being the most reliant ENT. So we can get kind of a bigger bang for a buck there. And so there's a lot of discussion around that, around what we might need out of that and how we should move forward. I think that was definitely a commonality. And then finally, to do a better drill down of the demand forecasts in those specific ENT reliant areas to really understand at a more granular level gas demand growth. How can we better either manage or stop growth in those areas? And then if taking a look at that, then where are our best opportunities in those areas? So those are some of the high level takeaways from tables 4, 5, and 6.
So Mike, just anything to add that kind of is very different that was important from your group?
So I mean, I would say we covered a lot of the same thing over tables 1, 2, and 3. Want to make sure they're represented. I think one of the things that we did dive into was a helpful a couple helpful discussions on the role of large institutions, the potential of their role as big demands generate big demanders of peak gas that really I think drive the presence and the need for some of these peak gas peaking moves such as EMT. So one of the things that I think we will take to that group is really starting to understand that customer profile, who those customers are a little bit, and get a sense of the size and opportunity that's there as well.
Great, Mike. So we have Pat Field online, who also facilitated 3 groups on EMT. Pat, if you are there, you want to say if there's anything to add?
I'm just gonna add one thing. I think Melissa and Mike will cover everything else. I think one of the questions that came up is what is the cost of lower reliance on EMT to the rest of customers who are still dependent on it? So as we decrease reliance, what does that do for costs who remain? So that was a question that they are interested in understanding better.
All right, thank you to our EMT facilitators. So we're going to hear from members of the DTP facilitation group coming up. So we have Liz who's going to kick us off and share some of the high-level takeaways from the groups that she facilitated. Right.
All right, I'm just gonna run down some of the themes that we heard, very helpful contributions on the decarbonizing the peak. So one of the first and common themes we heard across groups was around utilizing existing infrastructure. How can we, in support of a cost-effective transition and reducing reliance on peaker plants, how can we think about where we have underutilized assets and leverage the existing grid as well as pumped hydro storage and other surplus interconnection and leverage basically the existing grid wherever we can in service of costs. We also heard feedback that not all peaker plants are the same, and one that relies on dual fuel with burning oil during peak hours versus more efficient motor plants that rely on gas might look very different in terms of their emissions impacts. And we should be thinking really granularly about how we consider those different types of peaker plants. It's all very helpful, as well as on the spatial location. A theme of what we heard was around interactions across the fogs. So of course, there is really clear and important interactions between our gas and electric system. As we electrify, the implication is we will need, peak generation or peak demand will grow. And so how are we thinking about how the utilization and role of those peaker plants will evolve? I'll say that also kind of feeds into the second question around, relative emphasis on near and longer term. I'll talk in a second. One of the things we heard is, again, I would say on the theme of near versus longer term, that we don't end up too narrow by focusing only on technologies that are commercially available today. And it's probably worth thinking about both, near-term viable options and near-term action and recommendations, as well as those that are least regrets in terms of don't close the door for future investments or future potential technology options to come online in beyond 2030. We also, another theme was around DERs and load management. So, building on some of the work that DER is doing on load management, wanting to make sure that that is carried into this work. How do we think about, demand response, flexible loads, passive building investments to manage peak demands and lower peak demands to minimize peaker generation and take advantage of some of the analysis that's been done there to help prioritize recommendations. And then I'll end on 2 points that I think came up as being very important. One is resource adequacy. It's foundational. It's going to be important that whatever recommendations come out of this ensure and are consistent with ongoing resource adequacy. And then the second piece of that is cost effectiveness. Costs are critical. We are in a time when affordability is a challenge, but also kind of foundational to meeting our energy and state goals. And so ensuring that we evaluate pathways that are consistent with a cost-effective and affordable future can be important. So that's a high level what we talked about.
And was Abby gonna contribute it as well, or do you guys already consult?
We consolidated in, and I apologize if I missed something, but try to get.
So Catherine Morris facilitated some groups online as well on DTP. Catherine, anything to add?
I think the big message that we heard from most of our groups is don't take anything off the table, near or long term, but particularly because there seems to be more controversy around biofuels as the near term option. I think there was voices in every one of the three groups that I facilitated today that said, they're doable, they will give us time, and we need to be keeping them on the table and finding ways to mitigate the impacts, including hydrogen and hydrogen blended with natural gas, which I think hasn't gotten as much attention in the case study groups that I've been working with.
All right, great. Thanks to our DTP groups. So I'm gonna kick off sharing up some of what we've heard from the financing the transition discussion. So just a couple high-level themes. One was a suggestion that as we move into phase 3, it might be helpful to really clarify what is sort of the overall North Star or an overall set of statements reflecting what our group is trying to achieve. Some examples might be we're recognizing that electric rates can't support all investment. We're recognizing that we cannot cross-subsidize other sectors. We're trying to address those challenges at fundamental level through financing tools. A lot of suggestions related to what should be the nature of our phase 3 evaluation. So some suggestions to really put some concrete numbers on these ideas. Can we, for each alternative, for example, come up with a small version of it and a large version of it, and then actually calculate, well, what is the size of the savings that we're talking about? How can we evaluate these if we don't really have dollar figures attached to them? Or similarly, can we kind of put them forward as potential case studies or look at studies of where they've been tried elsewhere? Also suggestions around, what would it look like to really fine tune some of these alternatives to make them as effective as possible? So looking at potential regionality, right, collaboration with other states, looking at examples from where these alternatives have been tried elsewhere. Looking at and when deciding whether to recommend something, looking at what other commissions have already investigated. So for example, in the GHG fee, TCI, right, has looked into this quite a bit. Looking at what municipalities have done, BERDO, looking at other initiatives like RGGI when thinking about design. Also some suggestions that we really be careful when we are taking a tool that has been used in other contexts and try to apply it to distribution infrastructure. There needs to be a really careful evaluation of what it would look like in this context. It's not necessarily an apples to apples comparison, just because securitization, for example, has been used for these types of assets and other tools as well. Also a question around what is the ETAB voting for when it comes to these two additional alternatives specifically? And a suggestion on 2 fronts. Number one, you are not voting for any specific version of the proposal. You're not voting for exactly what was outlined in your materials. You're voting for whether this should move forward in phase 3 at a conceptual level. And also, this is clarification in general, but a vote to advance for phase 3 now does not mean that you support or not. It's just that you think it is worth having that within the mix of what's being evaluated in phase 3. And people at the same time wanted to suggest, well, there is a cost to doing that, so maybe we should focus on the art of the possible and focus on those alternatives that we think have the most likelihood of actually being implementable. And so some comments on that with respect to GHG fee in particular. That was those are some of the major takeaways. Catherine, you want to add some more?
Yeah, I'll be really quick here, but just some takeaways from our tables. There was a priority for intergenerational aspects in terms of intergenerational equity and looking at near-term and long-term impacts. There was a desire for a little more clarity on who exactly is paying, if it is ratepayers, what do we mean by ratepayers, kind of defining ratepayers. And then there was in terms of priorities, approaches that can be combined, so combinability of approaches, and no regret solutions or near term like biggest bang for the buck was some of the things we took away.
All right, Paul, is there anything you would add, keeping in mind we are bumping up against the hour and we want to make sure we do some votes here?
Just a couple things. I can be really quick, Toby. I would just add like 2 or 3 things that were mentioned in our groups. One is in terms of the criteria that less weight should be given to concerns over how this might affect utility bottom lines. Another comment related to the fact that in the past, we have not really looked at the impact or the plausibility of each option being easier or more difficult to better address LMI concerns. And so we've kind of looked at relative to traditional rate making, here's how you're financing the investment, but we haven't really thought about one mechanism or another being better or worse from the standpoint of the ability to design it in a way to accommodate LMI concerns. And then I guess the last one I'll just add is the recognition that the color coding is relatively simple. And it may be fine for a first order review of multiple options, but when we ultimately get to the point where we're comparing a couple of individual options, different weights will be placed on different categories, comparing across just a subset of the options, and we just need to be really, really explicit and transparent on exactly how we have been applying the criteria when coming up to a recommendation with respect to one option versus another. So those are the additional comments that I would add.
Thanks so much, Paul. So with that, we're going to move forward to some final decision-making voting on these questions. So we're going to have a couple votes for each of the pods. So we are going to go just a couple minutes over to do this. So apologies, but I should say we gave you extra 5 minutes, so we're going to take it down. All right. So here we go. First vote. Let's put this up here. So the question here was essentially for the EMT fog. There we go. Yes. We heard some initial recommendations from the ETAB on phase 3 work, and I think the vote here is essentially accounting for the input that was brought to the table today from the advisory board. Do you approve of the fog moving forward based on its work to date into phase 3 evaluation? And that is the fundamental question on the table. So we're going to just do a quick in the room raising of the hands for who's in favor, opposed, and abstaining.
So with that, and does that mean with the recommendation made by?
Including the recommendations made today, those will be consolidated and provided to the FOG, the ETAB's guidance.
So we're focused on more focused on the cost reduction, more focused on sort of demand reduction options, and looking at more strategically focusing and doing a deeper dive into understanding demand in those specific regions. So those were sort of the 3 high level kind of recommendations on how to better refine looking at it.
It's a vote to keep going and keep learning, keep studying, not a vote to ever approve any particular recommendation.
Correct.
Right, not at this point, no.
No. Okay, so with that, all in favor of the proposition, please raise your hands in the room. Okay, taking a look, I'm going to do a gestalt, and then if we need to, we can be more specific. All opposed? Okay. Anyone abstaining? And we do have 1 abstention. Okay, I'm going to go to folks online. So folks online, I was not looking at your hands because we do a slightly different version of this. So please put your hands down. Yes, okay, great. We are gonna ask online, all opposed, raise your hands. All opposed. Okay, seeing no hands, I'm gonna ask, are there any abstentions online? Okay, so our process is we assume the rest are in favor. All right, so next vote. Okay, so the proposal passes. Okay. Next slide, please. Great, so we're now moving on to the DTP. Okay, so this is essentially accounting for the input received today. Are we okay with the DTP continuing with its proposed approach for phase 2 assessment? Anyone want to add that, Melissa?
And so it's sort of the phase 2, and then as Liz talked about, the moving into the kind of archetype, so using the information we got based on the demonstration facilities, continuing that work, so we still have more there, and then using that to build out kind of a bigger system-wide look for the archetypes.
Okay. All in favor, please raise your hands. Okay. In the room, okay. All opposed? Okay, see one hand. Okay. Any abstentions? Okay, and it turns to our online participants. All opposed, raise your hand. Okay. Any abstentions? Online? Okay, I see none. Okay, let's go forward to our next vote. Next slide. So we're now turning to the FPT fog. And I'll just wait for the slide to come up. Great. So I think there's really we're going to do 3 votes here. One is a very similar vote to the one that was taken with the EMT FOD. Essentially, with the do we approve the FOD moving forward with the existing 7 alternatives that have done fully through the alternative assessment onto phase 3 evaluation using the framework that's been developed and for all the input that came in today on what we think that phase 3 should look like. Okay. That's the first time we're going to do 2 separate votes on each of the additional alternatives that have been suggested. Okay, I'll specify what that vote is going to be on in a minute. So first, just the moving to phase 3, accounting for the input that's been received today. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. Great, looking around. Okay. Any opposed? Okay. Any abstentions? Okay, 2 abstentions. Great, thank you. Looking online, any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, we're now going to move to voting on the 2 specific alternatives. So there is alternative number 1, DER aggregation financed by rate reduction bonds. We are voting now on whether the ETAB supports the FOG moving forward and doing more evaluation on these alternatives as part of phase 3. So these alternatives at a conceptual level being included in the phase 3 evaluation that's going to be coming up. We are not voting whether we support the specific proposal or not, whether we want it to be recommended or not. Should this be included within phase 3 now? And was there anything you want to add on that? Okay, so with respect to DER aggregation financed by rate reduction bonds, all in favor of including this in phase 3, please raise your hands. Okay. Okay. All opposed? Okay. See one hand, any abstentions? Okay, we go online. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, we're now move the same vote, but for the GHG and the state revolving funds, the GHG fee proceeds used to finance the state revolving fund among other ideas that are included there. So essentially a combination of these 2. All in favor of including this in phase 3? Raise your hand. Okay, all opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4 abstentions, okay. Looking online, any opposed? Okay. See one hand. Okay, thanks. Any abstentions? Okay, see one hand. Okay. Thank you. I think that's all our votes. All right, Melissa, do you want to walk us through what's next, and then we'll let people go on their way?
So really quickly, what's next is we'll write all this up, we're gonna get it out within a week in the minutes, so everyone understands kind of where we are. We'll make sure that we're really clear about what the recommendations were. If you see something missing in the recommendations, let us know, because that will guide the ongoing work of the book observers. And then we're gonna also send out a survey to everybody for the next meeting, which will likely be in January. And then I know, Melissa, do you want to have
Yeah, one of the great things about an in-person meeting is the chance to continue the conversation afterwards. If you'd like to have some social time, there'll be a group of us meeting right here in the lobby and walking down to the Uncommon Corner at the corner of Tremont and Boylston. So it's about a 15-minute walk, but it's a beautiful fall day, and I think everyone could use some fresh air. So please join us if you've got a little time.
All right, thank you guys. That was a lot of information and a lot of conversation, and the input was really, really valuable. Thank you guys. Appreciate it. For that, we are doing.
Yeah.